Okay, let's take a look at Federalist 51 now. This paper is going to explain the separation of powers in greater detail. Perhaps no other signature achievement of the U.S. Constitution is more famous than the vaunted checks and balances scheme. Madison states, quote, "In framing a government, the great difficulty is this: you must first enable the government to control the governed, and the next place oblige it to control itself." And this challenge will always loom over any social organization scheme. How do you get people with power to behave? Lord Acton reflects, quote, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still more when you superadd the tendency of the certainty of corruption by authority." So Madison and the other founding fathers found the best way so far to get people with power to behave. Their governmental design serves us down to this day, partitioning the powers in such a way, such a novel way, that those powers prevent the other powers from growing excessively strong. This is what every school boy and girl knows as the checks and balances system. Madison and the Founding Fathers were painfully aware of the corruption of power in government. Most of these men had helped to create and run state governments. Moreover, they were very well read, reading Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Grotius, Machiavelli, and much, much more. So in Federalist 51, Madison spells out and explains this separation of powers and why it needs to take place and how it will occur. By dividing the functions of the government into three branches, a way could be found to keep each branch in operation without being controlled by the others. So ways to prevent the other branches from growing too powerful could be found, can be explored, and this will create our vaunted checks and balances system. The legislature will become predominant in a federal republic, he held. He felt that the Federal Republic was essentially a legislative entity. The legislature would be essentially the central part of government. Locke held this as well, that the legislature would be like the hub of the entire government. These are the lawmakers. But in order to prevent them from becoming too powerful, the idea was to split them into two different parts, the Senate and the House. And each would be elected independently, and each would operate independently. And any law that had to be made or could be made would have to be approved by both. The executive branch, to remain balanced in power, will be given the ability of military defense without legislative process. In other words, the executive branch needs to be energetic, needs to be able to kind of turn on a dime and make instant decisions to protect. It takes the legislature far too long to act on such things. You have to get far too many people together and get them to agree. And so the executive needs to be able to make quick decisions to execute the laws, especially the laws to protect us from invasion and to put down uprisings and rebellions and so forth. Madison does not here discuss the judicial branch too much, but Hamilton does so later in Federalist 78. The judicial branch has to be free from the lawmakers, from the legislature, and from the executive to operate justly. So one of the things that will emerge, and had emerged earlier in the state legislatures or in the state governments, was that the judicial branch has the right of review, the ability to look at a law and determine whether the law is just or not. And the final arbiter of whether the law was just would be the Constitution. And so today the judicial branch can look at a law, review it, and say this law is in some way or another inconsistent with the Constitution. It's unconstitutional, and therefore it must be set aside. And so the judicial branch has that ability to have check over the legislative branch. So these are the Federalist Papers. They're fascinating to read and to delve into because they kind of explain the very DNA, the core of what makes the American experiment. And they often did call these experiments, but it's at the core of what we're doing as a political entity today. Now, let's look at some of the conclusions and try to revisit some of the themes and see what we can conclude from this lecture. We've seen Enlightenment theories of human nature. Interpretations of human nature are very important for constructing political solutions, because political solutions are in some way or another a way to solve a human problem. And what you see the problem as is driven by your interpretation of what human nature is. So liberal political theory is another thing that we've seen over and over again in the last two lectures, these last two. The idea that human reason can help us to see our way out of so many problems, both the problems of knowledge and the problems of knowledge when it comes to political organization. So reason should be our guide here. The social contract theory, the idea that human beings create contracts, agreements, covenants, if you will, and that these covenants are to be the proper basis of political rule. It has to be by consent. Rule must be something that everyone agrees to, even if that consent is implicit and implied by later citizens who weren't involved in the original contract, weren't involved in constructing that original contract like we are today. We consent based upon, in a tacit way, by staying in the society that we're in. And this was one of the areas that Hume famously attacked and said that was something that did not make sense for social contract theory. Another key concept that we've looked at is that natural rights and natural law are rooted in a creator. All of these contract theorists, Rousseau, Locke, Madison, Hamilton, all the founding fathers for that matter, all of them believed in a creator. Maybe they were not full-blown Christians. We understand that. They were not full-blown classic Christian theists, but they believed in a supreme being. They believed in a creator who makes humanity and gives humanity a type of image, if you will, sometimes called the imago Dei, or a kind of inherent human nature. The idea being here that this nature gives us these unalienable rights, as our Declaration of Independence famously says. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so it's patently obvious to reason, but it's also something that comes from a superpower, a divine being, okay? A supreme being. And so whether you want to be a deist or whether you just want to look at human beings in a purely rational, empirical way, this is self-evident that they have these basic rights. So equality and democracy emerge from this. Everyone is ultimately equal in the sense that we all share this same basic nature. And out of that equality, that concept of equality rooted in our nature, comes the idea of democratic rule, or rule by consent, that it has to emerge in a grassroots fashion from the people. So representative Republican government emerges in America, at least. The idea that the government, not only it comes from consent of the people, but that you can't represent yourself directly. Just imagine if all 300 and some odd million people in America tried to make laws themselves. Well, and then we all had to vote on each of those laws. You can see what a mess this would become very quickly. Direct democracy might work with a very, very small type of situation, a small town, but it could not work on a grand grand scale of many hundreds of millions of people. It wasn't scalable. And this is something that our founding fathers understood very quickly. And so we elect representatives, and then those representatives go and make the laws and vote on them. And so citizens in a republic do not vote on laws, they only vote on their representatives. Okay. Moreover, there's a specific individual Bill of Rights, that individuals have rights. If they have a nature, there's some implications to that nature, and that is that they have rights. And this Bill of Rights is a signature mark of the American political experiment, the American political moment. And that is that individuals have personal autonomy, personal freedom. And we also have economic freedom. That whole right to happiness is, in the Lockean view, a right to property. Jefferson changes it to happiness, but it implies that you have the right to pursue economic means to achieve your happiness. So freedom of religion is also there in the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment. Freedom of conscience, freedom of speech and press, a right to due process, and a protection of your property. All of these are rooted in your nature, that are rooted in what you are as a human being. And above all, this is ensured by the state. The security for all of that is ensured by the state. So what are some of the implications? Well, the civil rights movement of the 1960s assumes most of these views. Just take a look at MLK's letter from a Birmingham jail, for example, and see how he appeals to these, and he also appeals to God and to Scripture for his assertion of civil rights. The current quest for social justice in our society right now assumes absolute equality as normative. Might we stop and ask ourselves, what exactly makes people equal? This is something that many people never stop to ask. We simply assume equality, and we don't ask what it is that ultimately makes people equal. There are competing visions of equality today, and many of these build upon in these Enlightenment developments that we've looked at, and often unwittingly. In other words, they appeal to a type of equality that assumes things that are unexamined. In other words, we assume as true many of these Enlightenment achievements today with little or no reflection. It's just part of the air we breathe. It's the political environment in which we emerged and we thrive. But political visions are always built upon an interpretation of human nature and what a human being is. What is a human being, and what are our basic traits? To answer that, you also have to answer deeper questions about the very nature of reality itself. What is the world? Is it a purely material world? Or is there something or someone beyond it? All of the Enlightenment political thinkers believed there is a creator who imbued the world with a design and imparts an unalienable human nature to us. Many would disagree with that belief today, but they want to retain the house of human rights and the political economy that was built upon it.